Just under 2 months ago, Katie, Abe, and I moved into a house about 10 minutes north of Holy Blossom. And anyone seeking a new home will tell you, whether they are renting or purchasing, the process of finding a house can be extremely nerve-wracking. You are presented with this long list of things to do or fix, from door latches to roofing materials and anything in between. Some of the problems need immediate attention, like, for us, realizing the air conditioning unit is not working on an exceptionally hot day, while others can be put on a to-do list. No matter a person's timeline, however, it seems like the end will never come into sight, that the fixing in the building might go on forever. And as we look to our Torah, we know that there is a significant building project that occurs in the book of Exodus. And in it we find the many instructions given to Moses for the construction of the Mishkan, the holy tabernacle. However, with the Israelites taking much time and much care to create their sacred space, we do not learn that they complete their project until this week in Parshat Naso, 2 books later in the Torah. And as it is written about the holy Mishkan and this Parsha, and it came to pass on that day that Moses made an end of setting up the Mishkan, we finally have a clear picture of the entire structure. Whether in our personal houses or our communal houses of worship, we are reminded this week that we need to be conscious of the spaces that we are creating. Ultimately, the Mishkan is all about connecting to God. Even in the desert, this portable sanctuary helps to locate that elusive ladder that allows humans to climb towards the heavens. And in today's world, I believe we find this holiness of God not necessarily bound to holy places, but rather through holy relationships and righteous actions. That we should give space to holiness through ethical behavior. The foundation of the progressive Jewish experience is the concept of an ethical Judaism. While it is true that Jewish law is primarily about actions and deeds, there is also a great stress placed in the Jewish sources on the heart, what it thinks, what it feels, what it desires. There are commandments to love, to refrain from hate, to avoid envy, to rejoice, to fear, and to remember. It should be noted that although these inner character traits have direct implications for action, they also need to reflect the state of a person's soul. The weight assigned to measurable deeds in our sources should not overshadow the value of having a virtuous intention, a virtuous heart. More than any other commandment, we are told to love our neighbor. Now, we all know how to behave in a way that is respectful of our fellow human beings, perhaps some better than others. However, in order to fully live out this value, we must genuinely direct the character of our heart towards love. In fact, without a corresponding inner condition, it's extremely difficult to maintain over time the behavior that one admires. It is exhausting if we are not synced between behavior and intention. To generalize this, Jewish ethics are not strictly behavioristic, but rather the duties of deed, thought, and feeling are all interconnected. The duties of deed, thought, and feeling are all interconnected. And since a human being is not simply a rational behavior machine, meaning that we are not engines capable of deciding on one correct course of action and simply implementing it, the question of what drives or motivates a person is vital to our moral philosophy. Who someone is at heart will often dictate his or her treatment of others, even against better judgment. This is ultimately what I want to speak with you about this Shabbat. Not the necessity of being an ethical person, for that is a relatively easy decision to make. If we can choose between good and bad, we choose good every time. The real question is, how do we act when our ethical understandings of the world conflict with one another? What is the true direction of our heart when attempting to be holy in an impossibly complex world? This moment in history calls on the Jewish people to be ethically outstanding. This Monday, with the celebration of Shavuot, we completed a 50-day cycle of studying Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors. We read such gems as love work and hate tyranny. Who is wise? One who learns from all people. And turn the Torah over and over again, for it contains everything. As Rabbi Plaut comments on Pirkei Avot, what emerges from this text is a fascinating guide to human and especially Jewish living, a basic compendium to what Jewish ethics is all about. And with this wisdom fresh in our minds, over the past 2 weeks we have toiled over the ethical complexities of the escalation in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. We have all had to make decisions on when to speak up, call out hate, and when to listen and to hear narratives that challenge our understandings. We are hurting and healing and questioning. And every part of that is warranted and necessary. We are reminded that up until quite recently in world history, the Jewish people held very little power. And ethical behavior is much simpler when in a position without control or authority. However, the paradigm shifts when the modern state of Israel becomes a major world power, technologically, medically, militarily. And as Rabbi Spolansky taught us just earlier in our service together, we as a Jewish people have always felt a necessity to hold on to multiple truths at the same time. I imagine in many of our houses, we hold radically different opinions on a number of topics. Under Trump's America, we saw just how divisive today's political world can be. And in the same way, our congregation is made up of a spectrum of understandings and worldviews. Being progressive Jewish people, we have to remember that even when we are certain of our individual positions, that true religious and personal freedom requires us to be accepting of the difference of opinion. We must be able to come together in good faith, to speak openly and honestly together about what we believe. To put a spin on Rabbi Hillel's famous truism, if not here, where? Of course, we each have our red lines for what we are able and willing to tolerate. And so we ask, how will our congregational family confront and accept the myriad of feelings, opinions, and values? Jews live to discuss, to argue, and to form opinions over and over and over again, not for the sake of argument, but for the sake of heaven, for the sake of our personal growth. We do not shy away from saying, I learned and so I am changed. Let us remember that everyone is hurting, and everyone is hoping and envisioning their best world. And how we get to that vision of a better society looks different for each of us. It requires us to engage with the Jewish value known in rabbinic literature as dan lekaf zechut, judging everyone favorably. Also found in Pirkei Avot. This literally means the judgment on the scale of merit. The Talmud encourages us to consider the possible explanations or circumstances which would make the person's actions legitimate. Not merely excusing one's behavior, but genuinely attempting to understand the position as coming from a place of goodwill. Dan lekaf zechut, a rabbinic virtue in which a person looks upon everyone with a generous and favorable attitude, giving him or her the benefit of the doubt, even in circumstances which may appear suspicious. It is important to remember that in many scenarios, in our homes, in our congregation, the people who push us the hardest are also the ones that love us the most. Yet it is also true that this Jewish value can be dangerous when taken to the extreme. We can assume best intentions in everyone we meet, but we must also face the reality of the day. Anti-Semitism is at an alarming high. This is a truth that we must also hold. Attacks in Los Angeles, in New York City, Montreal, and Toronto, and more are showing that it takes little to provoke those who hate the Jews. The violence in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank have only made anti-Semites bolder, moving their comments from the shadows to calling for the destruction of our people in broad daylight. We must be vigilant in combating this vile hatred. Though I will tell you that what keeps me up at night is not necessarily this violence or hatred. As students of history, we know these things are not new to our people, troubling but not new. Rather, it is the fact that I now have friends, both Jewish and non-Jewish, religious and secular, who are pushing dangerous political rhetoric from either extreme point of view. What really disturbs me is the prevalence of a dangerous unthought known. The unthought known is a phrase coined by Christopher Bollas in the 1980s to represent those experiences in some way known to the individual, but which the individual is unable to think. As Dani Shapiro describes in her podcast, Family Secrets, the unthought known is something we absolutely know in the deepest interior of ourselves, but cannot allow ourselves to think. For to think it, to bring it to the surface of our consciousness is dangerous, and so we just don't. To articulate the unthought known can unravel an individual's sense of reality. This danger is also not foreign from our people's history. In the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., there is an entire floor dedicated to those who were neighbors of the Jewish people, who watched as their childhood playmates, their friends and colleagues were taken away. Perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of political alignments, whatever the case, those neighbors remained silent. They lived with an unthought known. Somewhere deep in their being, they knew those Jews were not going to be okay. But to accept this as a known truth would completely destroy their sense of reality. Their silence did not necessarily cause the destruction of life, but it created a path of least resistance. And right now, across the world, our incredibly left-leaning and incredibly right-leaning neighbors are unwilling to accept their unthought knowns. That those who support the destruction of Israel, that Hamas and its operations are entirely anti-Semitic and calls for the murder of Jewish people around the globe. The friend that you have never seen post a political statement before and suddenly takes an incredibly heavy-handed stance against Israel. They do not want to believe the truth that their post is based on old-world anti-Semitism. I have many Jewish friends who are posting some of the most disturbing ideas and hate speech that I have ever witnessed. How can a Jewish person accept the fact that they themselves might be spreading anti-Semitic hate? They cannot. And so they go on believing what they are saying is not problematic or driven by hate. The unthought known. And the unthought known, which is quite disruptive to me personally and to many of us, that perhaps on a few different levels, Israel represents the oppression of a people. It's easy to say that Israel is not perfect. That is true. And it can tear at the fabric of our belief systems if we accept as truth some of the horrible claims that we are being inundated with online. So what do we do? How do we act ethically? How do we sift through the hate? How do we become a holy people? Maimonides would tell us that we should seek the middle path, in the gray, in the uncertainty of ethics. That is where we are here, trying to make sense of it all. At Holy Blossom, for conversation, for dialogue, for a two-way street. Holy Blossom is our spiritual family, one community, all opinions welcome. And we invite discourse. We must make intentional space for ourselves and our fellow members to form our opinions over and over and over again. When we are making a home for ourselves, we may feel that the work is never ending. And when we build a Jewish identity and practice on ethical behavior, we will find that the world is not painted black and white. Rabbi Avraham Yitzhak Kook taught, Ben Adam alei lamala alei, ki koach az lecha. You human beings, rise above, rise up, for you possess a powerful strength. Yesh lecha kanfei ruach. You have wings of spirit. Our deeds, our intentions, our character connect us with the divine Creator. And in these sacred spaces that we construct for ourselves, let us seek out the ways of righteousness. As it is written in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, on three things does the world stand: on justice, on truth, and on peace. On this Shabbat, may we find all three. Ken Yehi Ratzon.